everybody, welcome to Late Seating with Steve Shives and Jason Harding. Thanks for tuning in. This week we are going to be reviewing the little-known, seldom seen, and entirely obscure movie called Citizen Kane. Can a movie about a man who is brought down by his own weaknesses and ego have any relevance to anything that's going on in this modern day and age? We'll find out. Once again, I'm going to make this statement despite the fact that this movie is more than 60 years old. There will be spoilers in this review. So if you haven't seen Citizen Kane, go out, watch it. You can even rent it on YouTube, of all places. And watch the movie, then come back, see our review, and then become very angry at our opinions. It's perfectly fine. We accept the people who really disagree with us. I've been reading the comments. But to start off, I'm going to start the review with Steve. Take it away.
Hey. Well, you know, Citizen Kane is one of those movies that we were talking a second ago before we went on the air. It's one of those movies that everybody has heard about, but it seems like not a whole lot of people have actually seen. At least people from more or less the current generation. But it's still sort of a consensus pick for greatest film of all time, or at least greatest American film of all time. It's kind of come down in that. I think it was number 2 or number 3 in the Sight and Sound poll most recently, and it had been number 1 for like decades and decades. But it's, you know, one of those movies that always gets mentioned when people say what's the greatest film of all time, as if there could ever be one particular answer to that question that would apply across the board to everybody. But yeah, and I have to say, I don't think, in my opinion, it's not my favorite movie. It's not what I would pick as the greatest film I've ever seen, but I think it's right up there. There is so much about Citizen Kane to admire, in terms of its style, in terms of how well it's directed, in terms of its performances, its writing, the really wonderful, subtle things that it does in its screenplay that I admire greatly. So, you know, even though there are movies that I like better, I have to say I'm not. If someone says, you know, Citizen Kane's the greatest film ever made, I'm probably not going to fight too hard. You know, I could say something. I could say, well, what about, you know, Ikiru, or what about you know, All Quiet on the Western Front, another great film that I love, or you know, a bunch of other movies. But Citizen Kane, if we're gonna say what's the greatest film of all time, I don't think it's actually that bad of a pick.
That's a glowing review. You can put it right on the poster. Not that bad of a flick.
It's, you know,
a good way to spend your Saturday.
Yeah, yeah.
I feel more or less the same way. Is it the greatest film ever made? No, probably not. But how can you apply that to any movie? Movies, you know, it doesn't span genres. It's not a sci-fi, drama, thriller, horror. You know, it can't do that. Movies have to be reviewed within the context of what it is that they're trying to accomplish. Is it one of the greatest dramas ever made? Certainly. Is it within my top 10 of my favorite films? Absolutely. I wouldn't even be able to tell you what my number 1 favorite film of all time is. It's one of those films, if you love movies and you want to see kind of the birth, the very first start of modern cinema, where a camera moves, where special effects are used to help tell a story, but they're not, you know, spaceships flying around or moving dinosaurs or a giant ape doing anything. You go to this, where you want to really experience cinematic storytelling, where there is, I'm going to have a caveat to this, where things are shown to you, not told to you. This is that movie. This is the movie where, before movies up to this point, they were static camera. You know, no one acknowledged, you know, no one moved the camera. Maybe it would pan a little bit, but they were usually static shots of a room, or, you know, they'd cut away to another static shot of something else. This movie had a lot of technical breakthroughs that other people would lift. Up to this day, people borrow from Citizen Kane, whether they know they're doing it or not. So as far as historically how important this movie is, I can't touch that. Citizen Kane is historically very important because it has influenced a lot of the directors to this point in cinema history. As far as it being a story wise, I have some problems with the way they tell their story, and I will say that my biggest problem with this story, the way they tell it, is the first, I would say, 10 minutes literally tells you everything that you're going to find out in the rest of the film. It begins with a newsreel story, and it beat for beat tells every single goddamn thing we're going to learn in the rest of the film. And I always found that really odd that they would lay out everything that happens in this guy's life, and then we would go back and watch it again. I always felt that newsreel, they should have just cut to Charles Foster Kane dead, and then cut directly into the people who are going to be investigating Kane's death, and do it from that point on. That way, you leave something for people late, so that you can discover things as you go on. That really felt like we got to put something in there for the dummies, or they're not going to be able to get it. And there were some great shots in there. I mean, rewatching it again. Whoa, uh-oh, that's me. Just a second, I'm sorry, but something is gone on. I'm so sorry about that, guys. But what I was going to say is, in the opening shots, just from a technical aspect, Kane with Hitler is so goddamn convincing. Yeah. I actually went back and looked at it again to see if they hadn't inserted him, to see if there was an actor portraying Hitler. When I saw that, I was like, holy God, that's better than everything in Forrest Gump. Everything in Forrest Gump, just chuck it out, because that little shot of Kane meeting Hitler was thoroughly impressive to me. And to be impressed by a movie that's more than 60 years old right now is a testament to how good it is. So I think what we can do now is move into the greater themes of the film itself and kind of pick it apart. I have my opinions on it. Steve, how do you feel about the overall story and themes of the film?
Well, I'm glad you brought up the newsreel segment at the beginning, because I was going to bring that up as what I think is an example of something that the film does really well, which is the old adage of it is better to show than to tell.
Yeah.
Well, what Citizen Kane does is it tells us, and then it shows us. And what I would say, the way I watch the film, the way I read the film, I guess would be another way to put it, is first we get the newsreel version, the public figure version, the Kane, the historical figure. Yeah. And then as we get told these things again throughout the film, we discover more of who he actually was as a person. And I always, to me, there's a really wonderful juxtaposition in this film between Kane that we are introduced to through that newsreel at the beginning, and then when we first see Orson Welles himself. And there's that beautiful. You talk about the great shots in this movie. There are so many great shots in the movie. One of my favorite shots is the introduction of Welles when he's in the newspaper office and his lawyer, his manager, lowers the newspaper to reveal him.
Yeah.
And there's young 25-year-old Orson Welles in all his glory sitting behind the desk, with this kind of a smug, cocky smirk on his face. And it's like, this is the guy that the newsreel was talking about. This is the richest man in the world. This is the tragic historical figure who lived all alone in a castle and blah, 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 blah. I mean, this is him. And that's what I like about that. Yeah, I mean, and in a sense, they are double beats because you are told things twice.
Yeah.
But when you hear it the second time, it's in the context of more of a discovery of, oh, okay, but here's who the real guy was. But then there's another layer on top of that. There's so many complicated things going on here, because you always have the issue in Citizen Kane of whether or not you're being told things through a reliable narrator.
Yeah, I was just going to say that. The reliable narrator really comes into play because there are subtle differences in Kane between who's telling the story about him.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And that sort of, because speaking of the themes of the movie, one of the major themes in the film, and one of the most obvious themes, is the difficulty that we experience in trying to know other people, especially other people that are separated from us, that are famous people or historical figures. I mean, that conflict is introduced right after the end of that newsreel, when
Yeah.
the reporters are like, well, what, the newsreel, it tells us all these facts, but it doesn't tell us who he is.
The
Go out and
unknowable
find out who he
shadow news reporters who are never,
is.
the main, basically the lead character in this story. We never get a clear shot of. We get
Right.
to see a little bit of his face at the very end of the film, but he is so not the story, to the point in which he is in shadow or shot from behind or shot from
Hmm.
a distance. And that is very much on purpose, that he is not he is the frame on which they're going to hang this movie on. He is the guy who has to go around and do all this stuff, but he's going to turn him into such a non-character that he is basically a silhouette of all of them are, all of the ones that are doing this kind of
Yeah.
investigation afterwards. One of the themes that I managed to think of, that I feel is that this is literally we never will know who Kane is, really,
Right.
because everything is told from a different perspective. This is not Kane telling his story. This is everyone else telling his story. So the kind of idea that I got from it was that after death, it is not the things that you accumulated or what you necessarily did in your lifetime. It is what people remember of you when you're gone. Everything about this is told as flashbacks, as told by other people in Kane's life. And the end scene, after we've seen all of these people remember who he is, his stuff is being sold off or burned. That's
Hmm.
the other thing. Here's a man who amassed huge amounts of just stuff, and it all amounted to nothing. The only thing that's left of him are the stories that people are willing to tell. And whether those stories are accurate or not, that really is left up to us. We talked about the unreliable narrator. The character of Susan changes dramatically depending on who is
Yeah.
telling the story. When it was Mr. Bernstein telling the story about her, there is a real love scene where the two of them meet and it's very romantic, and he goes upstairs and you kind of forget, oh yeah, he's married, but you know what, these two people have real chemistry, and she seems kind of dumb but very sweet. When Jedediah starts telling the story of Cain, her character changes completely to a screeching harpy of a woman
Yeah.
who uh, obviously is Jedediah's version of who she is. And when you finally get her, when she finally comes forward and tells the story, the character changes again to someone who is bored and feels that she has become a victim of Kane's manipulation and overbearingness. And and once again, it reminds me and kind of reinforces that idea that when you're gone, the only thing that's left of you is what people say about you. And I don't know if that was intentional. I don't know if that was, they sat down, Wells and Mankiewicz sat down. Mankiewicz is the writer,
Hmm.
and said, this is what we want the movie to be about." I don't think that they did that, but looking at it now, that's the kind of feeling I get from it. That nothing is the only thing that's lasting is what people say about you when you're gone. None of your stuff matters. None of none of your achievements matter. It's just what people you left in your wake. And he left a lot of people in his wake that were obviously very upset.
Well, one of the things that, as someone who admires the movie, one of the difficulties in talking to people who haven't seen it or maybe who are skeptical about it because it does have such an aura around it as the greatest film ever made.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's difficult to, because what if someone asks, well, what is so great about Citizen Kane?
Yeah.
And short of just saying, well, you just should watch it and decide what you think about it. It's hard to answer that question short of just showing them the movie. But I think one answer possibly to what is so great about Citizen Kane in a general sort of way is that every time you watch it, or even every time you think about it and you explore it and you ask questions about it and you try to pick out themes, uh, the deeper you get into it, the more you find that is just fascinating. I mean, even a simple question of, well, what is it about? Because that's one of my favorite questions to ask about movies is, what's it really about? Because you can always talk in terms of plot or in terms of characters, and I take a very literal reading of that. But what's it really about? What's the filmmaker really trying to say? And there are so many possible answers with Citizen Kane. It could be uh, the fact that what we leave behind ultimately is the impact we've had on other people. It could be the self-serving way that we all sort of rewrite our own lives. The fact that, like you said about how the character of Susan changes depending on who is telling the story, and people sort of alter her and alter themselves to their own benefit or to reflect their own point of view, and as a result, we as the audience can never be sure that we're getting the true story.
Right.
That's a big part of it. The impact of childhood.
Yeah.
The childhood of Kane and the alienation from his parents and the
obvious hatred he has for Thatcher.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's so much going on, and you could pick any one of those things or a dozen other things that we haven't even mentioned, and say that's what the movie's about, and it would be a valid answer. And that's one of the things that makes it such an endlessly fascinating movie.
And it's very watchable. That's the other thing. It's extraordinarily, you can just it's not. Some people I've met said, oh, they feel that they're afraid it's too highbrow, that it's like an art film. This is not an art film. This is an extraordinarily accessible film that anyone will, when you sit down, they will get right away. The way the story is told, there are points in which there is some dialogue, but there are other times where he's telling there's a great scene early on when Kane is adopted by Thatcher, and they sum up his entire childhood and his attitude toward this one guy with one 2-scene shot where he opens up a gift, which happens to be a sled, but it's not his childhood sled. And Thatcher leans down, and it's a POV shot looking up at him. It's a pan-up, gigantic Christmas tree, servants, there's a fire in the fireplace. And he goes, "Well, Charles?" And they cut to this kid. And he's gripping this sled like it's made out of disease. And I can't remember what the exact line is, but he has a look on his face that just basically says, "I fucking hate you, and I will always hate you." That is all we get, other than the brief scene at the beginning of his entire childhood. But that's all we really need, because he showed us with those 2 short scenes, without having to do a huge backstory, exactly what his attitude towards this adopted banker was like. And they do some of that throughout the film, where there are these little shots. The great shot of Susan singing in the opera house, and he does that fantastic pan that actually required 2 insert stills when they're panning up. They pan up from Susan, who's giving a terrible opera performance. They pan all the way up to the 2 stagehands sitting up in the rafters, and one stagehand turns to the other and goes, "That's it. We didn't need anything. We didn't need people going on and on about how terrible she was." It's great visual storytelling that needs to happen more, I think, nowadays, because movies have become very congested with exposition. It's probably why I have a problem with the beginning of the film, is because I always feel that opening newsreel, while extraordinarily well done, I especially like the shots that are obviously shot in a way that it's someone has snuck on to Xanadu, which is where Kane lives, and they're shooting it through bushes and behind fences
Oh
as he's
yeah.
being pushed around in his cart. That took me a second because I was like, damn, that's like something that was made today. That feels very like guerrilla filmmaking for just that shot. Um, but that's one of the reasons why I probably rankle a little bit at the newsreel at the beginning, because I feel that it's exposition for the audience's sake. I can see how artistically they could be threading this through, like this is what the public believes, and then we're going to go it's going to become more personal and more narrow focus, and we're going to reveal what the real story was behind it. I think that from a storytelling perspective, myself personally, if I was telling the story, I would want it to be fed to the audience as it develops through. Um,
Yeah, I think that it's by telling us first and then showing us it.
yeah.
You know, it is, like I said earlier, it is sort of a double beat, but at the same time, it's fulfilling that theme of, well, who was he really? You know,
Mhm.
and but you mentioned that awesome pan through the theater or up the
Yeah.
theater. That's an example of how, if your standard that you're judging by is how seamlessly the effects integrate into the story,
Hmm.
then Citizen Kane is one of the best effects movies ever made,
Yeah.
because there are numerous shots that are trick shots that you don't even
Hmm.
know are trick shots.
Yeah.
There's the famous crane shot that kind of floats over the rooftops and eventually pans down through the skylight into
Into the
the club.
nightclub.
Yeah,
Yeah.
where Susan is, and that's a miniature.
Hmm. There's another one where oh, I think we just lost Steve. So I've got to vamp until he comes back. I'm not quite sure where he went. So I'm just going to mention something, and hopefully he will sign back in. Um, Sorry about that, everybody. There is a shot in which Kane is giving his speech because he's running for governor of New York, and he's going on and on about who he calls boss Jim. He's an existing politician that he feels is corrupt. He has been dogging him in the newspapers. He's going to tell people that he's going to have him arrested and sent to Sing Sing. And there is a shot in which they show uh, Big Jim, the boss that he's talking about, while he's giving the speech. The speech is down below. Everyone, you can see the audience, you can see Kane on the podium and all that other stuff, and Jim is in the foreground looking down at that proceeding. That is a composite shot. That's literally, I believe they shot that. They just did an overlay. Most people wouldn't have noticed it, um, but that's also an effect shot, and there are lots of effect shots in Citizen Kane that you either see or don't see. One of the other things in Citizen Kane that most people don't notice at first is that he used a wide-angle lens to shoot most of it. Um, so that when the camera moves, you become hyper aware of the camera. That was a risky thing back then. Um, Movies up to that point, they didn't want the audience to think that the camera existed. So going wide angle, moving the camera as much as he did, because he was constantly panning in, pulling back. There you are.
Hey, sorry.
That's okay, no problem. I had to vamp. I made up a
I'm
bunch of
back.
stuff. People think I'm stupid now.
I'm sorry.
I compared Citizen Kane to Tom and Jerry cartoons.
Oh my God! What? No, sorry. Anyway, I'm
No,
back.
I just described the effect shot of is it boss Jim Nash when he's looking down at Kane's governor's speech where he's running for governor. That's a composite shot.
Oh yeah.
Um, I was also going to be talking about how they use deep focus, and there's a scene at the very beginning when Kane's mother is giving him up to the banker, and you pan into the house away from the window, and the people in the foreground are in focus, the people in the midground are in focus. There is a window in the back, and you can see little Kane playing. And not only is that
Yeah.
an interesting shot to tell a story wise, but technically, that was a shot that no one else was going to try. No one else was going to do. Oh, okay, we're going to composite this shot where it pans back, and we're going to do this, and we're going to be able to see the kid in the background. That thought went into this film that mostly didn't happen in other films.
Well, and that brings up a point I wanted to mention is just this was everybody knows the legend. I mean, this is Orson Welles' first film. This is his he was he was a star on stage and in radio, and this Citizen Kane was his first film, and it's not just that it's such a great movie. It's that it's such an audacious movie. He had such balls as a filmmaker. There were guys.
He got a gift that no one had gotten at all ever, and that was Final Cut.
Yeah.
Directors now don't even get Final Cut. But and RKO signed this deal. They said, okay, yeah, sure, we'll give you Final Cut, no problem. I don't know what they were thinking. I guess they wanted him that badly. I don't think he ever got it again unless he was, unless it was a production that he was doing when he went off to Europe or something like that. But Final Cut was unheard of. So he got to control everything that was going. You're right. He got to control everything that was going on in the movie. So he got to do whatever he wanted. And maybe it was because he was a first-time director, and there wasn't anyone on the set necessarily that was going to say, "Are you sure you want to pan in? We got just the focus and do this thing. And you want to do what? You want to interject in the shadow the past scene that we're just talking about, and then pan away from that? How are we going to do that?" And it was kind of like when you see a lot of new filmmakers, whether it's in the 70s or the 80s, and they come out with an independent film, and no one has told them that you can't do things. They do things that no one else has done. It was kind of like when Pulp Fiction or Reservoir Dogs came out.
Mm-hmm.
No one was telling him he can't do what he was going to do when you start splitting up the narrative and scattering it to different characters and different places. No one was telling Tarantino he couldn't do that. He was very intentionally doing that because no one else was doing it.
Absolutely.
The early films, George Lucas wanted to do. This is related to Welles because Welles also wanted to do a version of this. Lucas wanted to do Heart of Darkness, and his original idea was to actually go to Vietnam and film it, when it was still being fought. I really wish we still had that, Lucas. We don't anymore. But
no.
But there was no one really telling him, no. When he was making American Graffiti, there was no one telling him, what, you want to do One Night in 19... Who the fuck wants to watch that?
Right.
There is a quality to this film that makes it stand out to everything that was out at the time. And I think a lot of things contributed. He was given a lot of freedom, and he didn't know what he was doing. And he even admitted it in interviews that he did his naivete to that film helped him make that movie what it was. So,
yeah, well, and the thing about Welles was, it's not just that he was that he basically was given the run of the place and allowed to do whatever he wanted. He was so confident in himself as a director and in himself as a performer as well, because he had acted extensively, but on stage and on radio, he wasn't like a veteran film actor, and yet he not only builds the entire film around himself and his performance, and a very difficult performance, a very tricky performance of going from a young man to an old man and having to wear makeup and
when you're 25 years old.
Yeah, and devise different ways of walking and moving for the different. I mean, it was a very technically demanding performance, and the movie, with all of its technical wizardry and all of the wonderful stylistic things it does, ultimately the movie rises or falls on the success of that central performance.
Yeah,
because that's the guy. That's Citizen Kane, and if Citizen Kane doesn't work in Citizen Kane, you don't really have much of a movie. You have an interesting curiosity. You don't have a really great film, and Welles somehow had the confidence, the brashness. It's almost impossible to imagine nowadays.
Yeah.
unless you're talking about just someone who's nuts, like Tommy Wiseau, who thinks that they have what
Did
it
you
takes, but they
really
don't
just
actually.
bring Tommy Wiseau into a Citizen Kane review?
Tommy Wiseau, I'm sure, would have done that himself. We're here.
Okay,
And,
yeah, all right.
I'm a like Orson Welles.
Now I do want a remake
Um,
featuring Tommy Wiseau
yes.
as Kane.
Well, if you, I'm sure if you ask Tommy, that's what the room was supposed to be. It was. Um, but anyway, so like Wells, he doesn't just put himself in the lead role, and he doesn't just make himself the tent pole of the entire movie, but he
Yeah.
puts himself in, like the musical number at the newspaper, where like
Oh yeah.
the Citizen Kane theme song. Who is that man? That one. That was
It's
covered by
very
the White
sly.
Stripes.
Who is that man? And which is the entire plot of the movie.
Yeah, 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 and he's dancing and kicking, and I mean, it's a very audacious performance.
He succeeds very well in doing, I think, what their intention was that you like Kane despite yourself, despite knowing what you know, who he becomes, and what happens. He is extraordinarily charming. I mean, if you met this guy in real life, you would be like the other people who allowed themselves to become close to him, become friends. Ultimately, to be betrayed by the very things that you knew you were going to be betrayed by eventually anyway. I mean, Jedediah knows everything about this guy. He went to school with him, all of this stuff. He still becomes a alcoholic, as far as I can tell. He misses his old friend who had what was it, the 7 principles
Yeah,
that
yeah,
they established at the beginning. Because I don't think we really explained this. Kane is a newspaper magnate. He makes his money in the newspaper business. He has newspapers throughout the country, but he practices yellow journalism. And it wears his school chum down over the years to the point in which he can't take it anymore. He wants to be sent to another bureau. He doesn't want to be around him anymore. There's a period of time where they don't talk to each other, and it ends with him firing him and giving him a $25,000 check, which which his friend then tears up. It is a tragic end to two people who we get to see. They don't just say, oh, they were friends. We get to see them be friends. That we get to see why they're friends, and how he acknowledges that he has problems. That he's always been a jerk, and he's always no one can stop him, and he thinks very highly of himself. But when you meet Kane, especially when he's younger, you can't help but go, God, it would be hard not to be his friend. I've had friends like that I've had to walk away from. It was like, they're really great, but they're bad for me, and they're bad to other people. So,
well, I think that's one of the things that makes Kane such a magnetic figure. I mean, obviously the central part of that is that Wells is just fantastic in the role.
Yeah.
But he makes him an incredibly likable character, even though you see him growing into this monster.
Yeah.
And I think Wells, the director, and Wells, the writer, and Mankiewicz, the writer, make him into not just a likable figure, but they make him into a genuinely tragic figure. Where even though
when you say monster, I was like, it's a very human monster. A man who is so consumed by his insecurities and his need to be right, and his desperation to seemingly make people happy, whether they want to be happy or not.
Yeah, exactly. To make things the way, there's you get a glimpse of it in that famous montage of him and his wife at the breakfast table.
Oh my gosh!
There are those whip pans that denote the passage of time, and they get further and further apart. The table gets bigger and bigger, and at the end of that, his wife says, "But Charles, people will think," and then he cuts her off short and says, "They'll think what I tell them to think."
Yeah,
and that's sort of that's almost part of his life's purpose is to
Hmm.
make people think what he tells them to think, to make people happy because he wants them to be happy, and
Yeah.
they're going to be happy in the way he makes them happy, and they're going
Yeah.
to, he wants to control everything, and he
Hmm.
feels like he has the power to do it. So why isn't why isn't the rest of the world cooperating?
Yeah. Jed says after Kane loses the election because of a scandal, he
Yeah,
says you think people should you say that you love the people, and you feel that because of that the people should love you. As a matter of fact, as if he implies that because I'm giving you this gift, there should be reciprocity in that.
yeah,
And this is one of those movies that doesn't have a villain. Even Boss Jim, who exposes his infidelity with a singer,
hmm
they just don't have him show up and be bad guy. I'm bad guy and I've ruined your chance at governor. He says out loud, I have a family. I'm trying to save my family, my
right,
reputation, and you get this idea that maybe Kane has been persecuting a man for his own political benefit falsely. Kane's seriously talking about sending this guy to jail.
yeah.
And
It's
we have
practically his whole campaign.
Yeah, and we have
I'm going to
no
send him to prison.
evidence. Yeah, we're going to send him to prison. He's
Yeah.
screaming it or if you miss the jump cut where he's obviously not saying anything and he's screaming that he's going to send him to Sing Sing. This is one of the little bloopers in the movie. But you get the idea that maybe this guy is being wrongly accused, or maybe he's guilty of some of it, or maybe he's guilty like Kane is guilty for his infidelity. But he
Right.
explains himself. He says, "Look, I'm defending not just my livelihood or my income or my governor's seat. I'm defending my family." He said, he put forward, when my kids see a picture of me dressed as a convict in your newspaper, and it kind
Right.
of balances everything out. There's no one in this movie to hate. Not really. His mom's a little cold, but um, other than that, there's no villain here. There was a time where I thought, well, maybe they're thinking that the reporters are villainous because they're portrayed in the movie as very shadowy. We never see their faces. The guy
Yeah.
who's going around interviewing, he's a non-entity, and that is not him. That is not a statement on the media saying that they're this faceless evil thing. Although I suppose you could interpret it that way. It's more of a story device because these people aren't important. These
Right.
people don't have anything to do with Kane's story. They're trying to find out just like you are. So we're going to make them as transparent and not. You're going to have no memory of them after the story's done, and that's the point. They're just basically there to go around and talk. This one guy Thompson is to go around and talk to people. Um, the other thing I noticed, because I just watched this again this morning, there are lots of little things that are placed in places very much on purpose. The first time he meets Susan, he's invited up to her little boarding house room, and they keep showing a lot of the shots are through a mirror, and one shot specifically is when she is talking to Kane. Kane can't even be seen, and
Mhm.
it's her dressing mirror. And there are pictures, and there's all this other stuff and perfume, and she's radiant. She's gorgeous in this shot. And then right next to her, right in the shot, is that frickin' snow globe
Yeah.
that is used later on, and that's someone paying attention to the story. That is someone who's like, oh, this snow globe's important. Let's stick it in here. Oh, that'll be cool. We'll put that in there. Oh, I know. Let's have a dissolve shot from her eye after she gets slapped to the all-seeing eye in the window of the estate. There are lots of little,
Yeah.
subtle, fantastic things in this movie. And
Mhm.
a lot of funny things, a lot of humor, a lot more humor than I remember from. I haven't seen the movie probably in about 10 years, up until getting ready for this review. And there's a
Yeah.
lot more humor in it than I remember.
Well, like you said at the beginning, I mean, it's a very watchable movie. You
Yeah.
know, I mean, on the one hand, I would say it's almost like it's the greatest film school movie ever made because there's so much you can learn from it just from watching it and taking it apart. But at the same time, it's a really enjoyable movie. It's not something that you sit there and you feel like you're doing homework watching it. It pulls you along really well. It moves very well. It has really engaging performances. It's not like a heavy, serious, sort of the stereotypical like pretentious art house movie where you sit there and go, I know I'm supposed to like this, uh, but I just can't get into it. I mean, it's not that at all. It's a very engaging movie.
Yeah.
And yeah, and one of the things that I always loved was because yeah, there are all those little visual you would almost today you would almost call them Easter eggs, little things that
Yeah.
just that remind you that the movie was directed by someone who actually read the script. Which nowadays it seems
It's
some
not
movies are directed by
happening.
people. Some people, it seems like some movies just are directed by people who haven't read the script.
Right.
But yeah, there are many of those, and in that scene on the street when Kane meets
When he
her
gets
before they
splashed,
go,
yeah.
yeah, when he gets splashed with mud, there's a line of dialogue where he mentions that he was on his way
To go get this stuff. Yeah, they start talking
yeah,
about his
to go get some stuff that belonged to his mother, and then when you find out at the end what Rosebud is, that Rosebud is his childhood sled, you start to think, well, maybe if he had not been interrupted and he had made it to that warehouse back then, maybe he would have, satisfied that longing or,
Yeah.
closed that loop back then as opposed to on his deathbed. And it's just one of those things that, again, shows that the movie was made, it was written, and it was shot very painstakingly.
Yeah.
They had a very good idea of who Kane was and of what his story was about, and they would drop little things in there, these little pivot points where it's like, oh, if he had gone that way instead of that way, how would his life have turned out?
Right.
And the fact that the movie, when it encourages you and to think about it like that and holds up under that sort of thought and actually becomes more interesting when you think about it that way, speaks very well for it as well. I wanted to mention, because a couple of people, when I posted on Facebook about this earlier today, they said, "Are you going to talk about the plot hole?"
Oh.
And there is one really huge plot hole in Citizen Kane that I personally don't care about at all, because when I watch the movie, it doesn't enter into my mind unless I'm thinking about it already. So I don't really think it's that important. But it's who actually heard him say Rosebud. His last word is Rosebud. He appears to be alone in the room, and he whispers it. And then all of a sudden, everybody knows that his last word was Rosebud.
Right.
Now, I personally don't give a shit.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Here's the thing about plot holes. If the movie is good, if the story is strong, if the overall the thing that you walk away, plot holes are glaring when a movie is bad. When a movie is good, you overlook them. Raiders of the Lost Ark is filled with a gigantic plot hole that I didn't realize until 20 years after that movie had come out, and I went, "Oh yeah, how did he stay alive outside of a submarine as it traveled across the Mediterranean?" Plot hole, and here's the other thing: the butler says that he heard him say lots of crazy things.
Yeah.
I hear him say lots of crazy things. Oh, by the way, I'm a scumbag. And and I heard him say Rosebud after he thrashed his girlfriend's apartment, and oh no, they got married. After he thrashed Susan's apartment, and he says he heard him say it after, in the room, which would imply that he was in the room and he was not alone. We don't see his whole room at the beginning of the movie. We just see a close-up of his face, the dropping of the globe, and then the nurse comes in. And then the butler could have been there and maybe heard it, because someone, I guess, could have been calling it. It's kind of left to interpretation. If you want to interpret it as a plot hole, fine, but I don't care. I don't.
To me, the correct answer is that it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
You can come up with a justification for it, or you can kind of, well, maybe the butler was in the room. Okay, fine. I don't care. I mean, if it is a legitimate plot hole and it's something that was just an oversight on the part of Wells, it doesn't matter
Mhm.
because yeah, I mean, I would have put it almost exactly the same way you did.
Mhm.
Plot holes in good movies don't matter. Plot holes are only important in bad movies.
Yeah.
Uh, and in a movie like this, in a good movie, um, it's not even something that you as the audience member, or at least speaking for myself, it's not even something that I as the audience member even have to exert any effort toward. You know,
Yeah.
people say like, "Oh, you just gloss over plot holes." No,
Mhm.
I don't. The movie does that for me. It's a
Yeah.
mark of good filmmaking that I don't notice it, and if I do notice it upon further inspection, I don't really care.
Right. Yeah, that's basically that's basically it. The other thing that maybe some people have noticed is that we're not talking about the whole Hearst connection or any of the other stuff in regards to
Mhm.
this, and that's because I am bored to shit with people talking about William Randolph Hearst in connection to this film or its film history or how it was suppressed or blah de dee blue de dee blah. This is a review of the movie itself. If you're interested in that, there are a shit ton of documentaries. I have one right here that came in with my set of Citizen Kane called The Battle for Citizen
Mhm.
Kane.
Yeah.
If you want to investigate that, that's fine. But once we start talking about it, it's not much more than gossip. And we're not here to gossip about movies, we're here to review them. And as we're getting closer and closer to the recommendations time, remember the guys, this is a rigidly timed hour of entertainment for you. Um, I would like to just do a couple other things, and it always surprises me every time I watch this movie. No music for the title of the film. It
Yeah.
just says the Mercury Theater, RKO with the deet deet, and then it's completely silent for the Mercury Theater. I can't remember what it says. Mercury Theater is just white letters on a black screen, and then it says Citizen Kane, white letters on a black screen.
Mhm.
I've seen it a billion times in a billion art house films, and it surprises me every time because you always expect movies from the 1940s and 1930s to start off with dun 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 and
Yep.
then have the wipe where it comes across. And it was one of those things that how many people in 1941's audience when they sat down to watch the movie going, oh no, the sound's out, oh, and
Right.
where's my big stirring dun 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 dun. um and there was one other thing, and now I can't even remember because I'm so tickled about the opening of the movie.
Well, the thing about the movie that I love stylistically probably the most, and we've talked about it here and there, but I don't think we've ever quite nailed it down. Is just I love the way, and he does it in so many different ways. I love the way Wells as a director makes use of the space. Uh, he does it with the camera movement that we've mentioned. He does it with the way he shows his sets. There are multiple very important scenes in this
Mm-hmm.
movie that make use of enormous interior sets.
Oh yeah.
There's the vault when Thompson goes to read the chapters
Oh,
from
the gigantic room, the
yeah
gigantic
it's this
room with the huge
yeah
table.
yeah it's and then there's the sort of the great hall in Kane's home with the
With this
fireplace.
fireplace actually burning whole trees in it, it seems like.
It's just this massive, and then there's the great corridor where he walks past the camera in that famous shot with the mirrors that just
Yeah.
seems to go on forever and has an incredibly high ceiling. There's just it uses space in a way
And
that
he uses
had
the
rarely
space.
been done.
He uses the space to imply motive. People are constantly coming in and out of shadow at certain points. The shot
Mhm.
where he's confronting Boss Jim and Susan's there and his wife is there. They come into shadow. There's a great shot of the two of them standing next to each other. The wall is lit up and bright. They're kind of in this gray area, and it's that moment where you realize they're both the same basic person. They're both corrupt in their own way, and they're both kind of justifying what they do to each other at the same time. He uses composition, color, shot, the placement of a character when a character becomes small or a character becomes overshadowed. There's a scene where Susan is complaining that she doesn't want to do this. She didn't want to become an opera singer. She's being horrible things, and
Yeah.
he's going along with it. He's just blah blah, and then he gets exposed by this thing in his past, and he just steps forward, and he's being very direct, and you're gonna do it because I say you're gonna do it, and her face falls falls under his shadow. He's not even in
Hmm.
shot, and that kind of storytelling doesn't get told anymore. Yeah, it seems like people are afraid to use composition and lighting to help you set tone and mood and give just as kind of undercurrent of subtext to everything to the story that you're telling.
Yeah. Well, and the tragedy is that it seems like mainstream movies, big screen blockbuster movies, nowadays are made at the level so that the stupidest person in the theater will know what's going on at
Mm-hmm.
all times. Like there'll never be a moment where they're confused or they're perplexed by anything. So
Mm-hmm.
everything's laid out flat and told you repeatedly over and over and over. And the tragedy of that is, as Citizen Kane, I think, demonstrates, you can make a movie that is rich and complex and subtle and uses all the tools available to a film director to
Mm-hmm.
tell us these things or to show us these things without just having characters talking about it or having it just flat out be told to the audience. And you
Yeah.
can do it in a way that still allows you to make an open, engaging movie where it doesn't feel remote and it doesn't feel stodgy or cerebral.
Mm-hmm.
It's still a very charming, charismatic, gripping movie, but it
And
has all these things going on.
yeah, and human to a point in which anyone will get it.
Yeah,
He's not having an existential crisis. He's not in a fugue state where we have no idea what massively complex things that he's trying to think of. His foibles are everyone's foibles, and
hmm,
everyone's feelings is everyone's feelings, and that's one of the things that makes the film interesting. So to sum up real quick, is Citizen Kane the greatest movie ever made? In my opinion, no, but it is one of the most important films ever made, especially to cinema today, and that's saying a lot for something that was made so long ago. If you see Citizen Kane and then you watch movies after that, you will start to see where things get lifted. There's stuff from Raiders of the Lost Ark that are in this movie. The above shot of all of the merchandise and everything else, things get lifted from this movie all the time, and I highly recommend that if you have not seen it and you love film, to go out and see Citizen Kane. And if you have seen it but you haven't seen it in a long time, see it again. It's everywhere. It's $2.99 on
yeah.
YouTube. It's $2.99 on Amazon, which also speaks volumes for the fact that it's not an Amazon Prime. You still have to pay for it to be able to watch it. So it is good in that respect. It's good enough to never be free. Steve?
That's what a great endorsement. Good enough
Yeah.
to never be free. Um, I would say I would echo everything you just said, Jason, and I would just say if you love movies and for whatever reason you have not seen Citizen Kane, uh, especially if you love American film, it's the one movie that you have to see as soon as possible. If you have somehow escaped seeing it and you fancy yourself a movie person, see Citizen Kane. And it's one of the essential movies. I mean, there are movies that sort of you can chart the history of narrative cinema by certain films, and Citizen Kane is one of those really big turning points where it's like a birth of a nation without all the troubling racism. It's just as innovative in its way and just as important as that film was, but you don't have to feel bad for watching it because
You don't have to wash afterwards.
right. You don't have to say, well, okay, it was good, but you
To a
know,
point.
you can just
Okay.
say it was good.
So
Yeah,
that's our
highly
review for
recommended.
Citizen. That's our review, and now we're going to go to the recommendations. These are going to be films that either you probably didn't see, maybe never heard of, or older films that maybe you haven't seen but have heard of. And my recommendation this week, very quickly, is going to be the 2003 film of Zatoichi. For those that don't know, Zatoichi was a series of films back in the 1960s about a fat blind former samurai who disguises his sword in his cane, and he basically travels town to town, and he poses as a masseur, so he massages everyone in town. Everyone goes to see the masseur, and he learns all the secrets, and he learns people's stories, and he eventually slaughters a whole lot of people in every movie. In 2003, Takeshi Kitano brought back that character and made Zatoichi. I'm going to do this really quick because I want Steve to get his recommendation. It is violent. The CG effects are kind of bad, but the story is one of the things that really kind of ropes you in and pulls you in. It's a more modern story. It features characters that were never featured in the series from the 50s and 60s. Beat Katano is the guy who plays the lead in the film. He plays Zatoichi. He does a fantastic job. There are a lot of supporting characters that do a great job. If you want to watch a blind man kill a shitload of Yakuza and get a musical number at the end, go see Zatoichi. You can. Right now I think it's on Netflix. I think. I'm not sure, but go see it. That is spelled Zatoichi. 2003. Steve?
Well, I'm going to stick with Orson Welles for my recommendation, and I'm going to recommend one of my favorite Welles movies that maybe not everybody has seen. It's from the same era as Kane. It's still sort of young Welles, and it's another film that he himself directed, and it's called The Lady from Shanghai. And it co-starred Welles' wife at the time, Rita Hayworth, and it also has another.
God, what a lucky son of a bitch!
I know, right? And it also has another great old school actor named Everett Sloane, who was in lots of films and was in television in the 40s and 50s and 60s, and it's another sort of a film noir thing. Last time my recommendation was Out of the Past, which is a classic film noir, and Lady from Shanghai is sort of in the same category. Welles plays an Irish sailor, and he plays the whole movie with an Irish accent. So if you've ever wanted to see young Orson Welles do like an Irish accent for 90 minutes, Lady from Shanghai is for you. And he gets involved in like a murder plot. There's a rich lawyer who wants Welles' character to help him fake his death, and then they're going to frame someone else for it. And it all gets very mixed up and complicated, as film noir plots tend to do. But the real reason to see the movie, other than just the joy of seeing Orson Welles as a young, vibrant, incredibly charismatic performer, is the climactic scene that takes place, that is staged in a hall of mirrors. And Welles, as a director in Kane, used mirrors just incredibly well for that, for a couple of shots, particularly the corridor shot where he's walking down the hall and he's sort of multiplied into infinity by the mirrors. There's an even more surreal, very complicated staging of a shootout in a hall of mirrors at the end of The Lady from Shanghai that is a really influential, very, very, very much imitated series of shots, and it's so well done. It's the way he uses mirrors to create like multiple frames within the frame, or to do lap dissolves or double exposures with one person in the mirror in the foreground and another person in the mirror in the background. It's just a really, and again, it gives it a very surreal effect. So I would recommend the whole movie just for that. But the movie itself is a really good example of film noir and of young Orson Welles too, and him still able to direct a movie and more or less do his own thing before he kind of hit that skid part of his career where he had trouble doing the movies he wanted to do. But yeah, that's my recommendation, The Lady from Shanghai, and it's available on Amazon and Google Play. You have to buy it. Unfortunately, it's $10. You can't just rent it, but it's
like we said, if it's so good that it'll never be free.
Exactly. But it's well worth it. So.
All right, guys, that's it. Thanks for joining us again. We love doing this. I know a lot of people were expecting us to review things like Edge of Tomorrow and a bunch of other boring bullshit that's out in the theaters right now, but I would rather gouge my own eyes out than review a Tom Cruise movie right now. If it turns out it's going to be good, then I'll see it on DVD, download, whatever. But if you guys have a recommendation for something that you want us to review, whether it's currently out now or in the past, please leave a comment down in the comment section. I promise I read these things, even if you disagree with that. In fact, I like it when people disagree with us in regards to our reviews. So speaking for myself, thank you for tuning in. Steve, do you have anything to say to the audience before we leave?
Thanks for watching, everybody.
Thanks, everybody, and enjoy the rest of the afternoon and go see a movie this week.